You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Hey, welcome back to the Shoe and Show, folks. As always, as the local league said, we are focusing on all things footwear and impacting our industry. And right now, one of the biggest issues that we see, obviously, is marketplace issues and demand. But at the front end, in terms of where we're making shoes, the supply chain remains interesting, to say the least. And so we're focused a lot on the churn that's happening at the front end of our industry, right? The production side, the supply chain side, kind of the cost planning and demand planning that's going on, because I think we're in a unique time right now where we see a bit of a slowdown, but in 6 months we could see, growth again, robust growth, and what that might mean. And so kind of help people think a little bit more critically about that and sharpen strategies. Matt, who we got on the show today?
So we're excited to have one of our longtime guests who's been on the show a number of times, Andy, and who's a friend and a partner, and he's briefed our board and he's been to our events. We've known him, for over a decade, because he brings this just an expertise that's phenomenal and helps us keep track in real time what's happening on the supply chain side. And that's Mike Piza from Apex Global Logistics. Mike, welcome back to the Shoe and Show, my friend. Thanks for joining. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt and Andy. Appreciate it.
So let's get right to it. We're tracking every week. You're on our calls pretty regularly, on our member calls. We track the rates that we're seeing coming out of Asia in particular. On the cargo side, the container rates, they were astronomical. Now they're rock bottom.
Right. But
talk to us about what you're seeing on the rate side and some of the intel that you're hearing from your team over in Asia.
Yeah, it's a great topic, Matt. Thanks. The rate side, it's amazing what a year, how it's changed in 12 months, really. It's really dropped quite a bit. You're right, it's rock bottom rates at the moment. There's some interesting dynamics on the rate side, because like the ocean carriers want to get those rates up quite a bit. They're trying to drive home GRIs and things like that. But the spot market is below kind of the fixed rate market. So, a lot of the large shippers, the BCO, beneficial cargo owners, they sign fixed rate contracts for the year, and they're at a certain level, depending on, port pairs and so forth. But the spot market is still below that fixed rate market that people signed at. So you see the ocean carriers trying to drive home these rate increases, but the demand is just not there. So it's a problem. So, the ocean carriers have vessels. They have vessels that are sailing not full at the moment. I mentioned to you earlier, we've seen some vessels sail at like 60, 70% full, which is a far cry from what we saw during COVID. So it's hard to understand like how the ocean carriers are going to get that rate increase. But the market's very dynamic right now, and it's amazing to me just how different it is now than during COVID. I mean, it's really a drastic change.
I remember during the height of the rates, 30,000, let's just say in a general sense, 25, 30,000 per container. And I remember all this consternation from the shippers about these rates for obvious reasons. They were just mind-blowingly high. And at the time, the carriers basically saying, look, you don't want to lock us in, because there's this legislation that was moving through on the Hill about creating more price parity and control and line of sight into the pricing and all that kind of stuff. And the carriers themselves are like, hey, we've been honoring awesome spot rates for a long time now. And just because we're getting ours right now, don't shoot yourselves in the foot, because we'll return to a marketplace where the spot rates are relatively low. Right. We represent our members through and through, but we're now at a moment, as you mentioned, the below average spot rate market, where the carriers are probably saying, see, we told you so, like prices are rock bottom now, and locking yourself in. Talk about kind of those dynamics as it relates to the negotiation side. How are shippers, are they, I guess, kind of what position do they have as it relates to negotiations?
Yeah, it's very interesting, Matt, because like during COVID, the ocean carriers were like, the rate is what it is. You got to take it or leave it type of thing. And now they want people to sign these contracts that are above the spot market. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And the carriers kind of forgot about customer service during COVID. They forgot about loyalty and all these different things. Matt, I didn't get a phone call from a carrier in 3 years during COVID. No carrier called me. Now I get a call every day from a carrier saying, "Give me more cargo," and like so. It just seems like they forgot about us during the hard times, and now it's a hard time too. I mean, on the logistics side, it's a hard time for them right now. But when it was a hard time for the customer, they didn't really care. And that dynamic is very fascinating to me. And I was talking to the head of my ocean freight group today, and he was telling me this story. He's like, "This happens every 4 years. The ocean carriers, they try and consolidate, they try and do this. It's the same conversation, it just goes in a 4-year cycle, and I think it's true. Like that, but the one thing I will say is I don't think the market's going to change. We're a big NVO. We move about 150,000 FEUs, per year. Obviously, we're famous for our air freight product. So we move a lot of cargo, and the forecasting is just way off. Customers are down 30-40%. So we don't think it's something that's going to change in the next 6 to 12 months. We think this is a 12 to 18 months kind of COVID reset, or something along those lines. And we wish it was different, but from our standpoint, listen, we're a diverse business too. We have military business, we have perishable, we have a lot of different commodities that we're shipping, so we're diversified. But what we've seen is that fashion retail is the one that suffered the most. And I just want to add one other comment here, Matt, that retail got hit first. They were the first ones to suffer, right? Because if you were selling to like a Walmart, I don't want to, if you were selling to a big box guy, right? Those guys didn't want to pay those. When the rate started to slide last May, they didn't want to pay that high container rate. So they kind of took it out on a lot of the footwear, fashion retail customers and said, "Oh, we're not going to." First of all, I never charged $25,000 or $30,000. I want to make that clear. So I was always below that. I was always like the 15 to 20,000. But I'm sure that there was guys out there that high. But when the rate started to slide, those big box guys said, "Listen, we're not going to pay for that high rate. We want the rate as it slid down." So a lot of people got stuck with a lot of inventory, which I think you guys have talked about, intensely on some of your calls on the inventory levels. But the reason I'm making the comment now is that other industries are suffering now. Like the European air freight market was very strong up until recently. Okay. And that's mainly industrial equipment and things, high end machinery and that type of stuff. But in the last 2 or 3 months, they are suffering. They're not shipping either. So I think it's going to kind of, retail got hit first, but I think we're starting to see it across other industries now. So, we have to just keep an eye on it and see what happens.
That's interesting. I mean, it seems almost like if you look at the map, it's like the difference between like night and day, right? As the sun starts to set in one area and the darkness starts to spread in a recession across the map.
Correct.
But then hopefully somewhere else the light starts to pick up at the end, right? And so we see the slowdown in America, and now we're seeing it in Europe, and I think that's going to keep spreading for a number of reasons. I want to ask you a question because I remember we had a discussion, and I think it was on this podcast or somewhere else, but it was intriguing to me that air freight, majority of air freight being moved around was on like commercial planes. So obviously we have commercial planes fully resumed, like we see people packed out on these flights, but I've also seen where airlines have trimmed flight paths and things like that. They're trying to optimize. We don't see as many business people. So as kind of the airlines kind of change their planes and change their flight paths, if we get back to a point where we see all of a sudden a huge consumer spike, is the capacity okay for air freight in terms of handling larger volume to the point where the price won't spike like what we saw?
Right. There's a lot of capacity out there right now. And especially in the European trade lanes, people are going on vacation to Europe. We haven't seen the commercial capacity go back and forth to Asia as much yet, but it's going to come, right? People aren't going to some of the Asia destinations just yet, but it will come back. I think your point is a good one, Andy. That there's two factors going on too. Like there's a huge e-commerce boom coming out of China and like coming out of Asia, right? The Sheins and these customers, and they're paying a premium for this. The Section 321 entries, Type 86 entries, and you're seeing huge volumes of cargo coming in that channel, that Type 86 e-commerce channel. And there's a few other companies. Shein's the easiest one to kind of explain, but there's some other ones that are right there next to them. And I know you guys would know better than me, but there's some legislation out there to kind of control that. But it hasn't been addressed yet. So you're seeing those e-commerce companies kind of pay a premium for air freight. So even though you would think there's more capacity, right? Those guys, without giving out numbers and things, they're paying a premium for that air cargo. But the demand from the USA companies isn't there yet. So the USA companies are saying like, we don't want to pay that premium. So there's a dynamic there on the e-commerce side that's quite interesting as it relates to air freight. But I also want to talk about ocean freight here too, because you're talking about the same thing when it comes to capacity. That the ocean freight has a lot of capacity coming on in the next 1 or 2 years with new vessels and all this stuff, and the demand is not there now. So like, what's going to happen next year when you get like a certain percent increase? I'm not in the know in terms of number of vessels coming on board or size of vessel. I have a general idea, but I think the capacity increase is like 10 or 15% next year on ocean freight, but demand is down right now. So like, what's going to happen, with that as well?
Well, I have a question about that too. I'm not an expert on all this, so I speak on behalf of all our listeners, Mike,
Right.
and that's why you're on. Are the ocean shippers going to change their model to where they do more express shipping then? If you have more capacity and you want to raise the price a bit and like make a different economic model for them, does that mean like they're going to start? And we've already seen a company doing express from like Vietnam to Portland, right? They only
Right.
do
Yep.
Vietnam to Portland. That's it. And so are we going to see more of that instead of all these different berths that we keep seeing? Like what's the future look like in terms of speed that people can
Right.
get the product in?
I think that's a good point. I mean, there's niche players out there that are doing this, express services, and it's cheaper than air freight. It's high demand, smaller vessels type of thing. And I don't know if I can answer that question fully because the big carriers are shipping these big vessels, right? And the express is typically smaller vessels, niche ports type thing. So
Yeah.
we'll have to watch that as it moves forward.
Mm.
Maybe we can get on a speedboat out of Ho Chi Minh and just like
Yeah.
bust ass across the Pacific in a Miami Vice speedboat. That'd be amazing. Just with like one pair of shoes for a customer.
One container.
Yeah, exactly. So let's unpack a couple of things you mentioned. The legislation, just so our listeners are informed. There's a lot of focus right now on de minimis, which allows you to bring in product that's under $800 per customer per day and to avoid duty. So Shein and Temu are in particular taking advantage of this. And there's a select committee on the Communist Chinese Party that had a hearing about, by the time we're listening to this, it's probably been about a month. And in that hearing, there was conversation from former President Trump's former trade rep talking about this. And he highlighted de minimis as a loophole for these direct to consumer shippers like Temu and Shein that are avoiding duty, and wants to crack down on it and lower that. That would take an act of Congress. We'll see if that has legs, but that we suspect that will be a proposal that comes out of the committee that doesn't have any legislative power, but will make recommendations. So that's to put a finer point on what you brought up, Mike. I will say, talking to people on the ground, particularly in China, and I want to ask you kind of where you're shipping your activities coming from right now. What's the balance, particularly between China and Vietnam? Because I talked to a big shoe company that sources most of their product out of China, and the person there runs it. They were like, everyone's run for the door. They're spooked by China for obvious reasons. They're all running to Vietnam, which has been the trend for a while now. And this person says they are getting like rock bottom prices, back to the rock bottom point, rock bottom prices from factories that are going to go into debt or have a negative year just to hold on to customers. And so it's like name your price. And that's the environment we're seeing in China. because the demand has dried up and these companies are just trying to hold on to people. How does that look across the different product categories you serve? Are you seeing similar dynamics?
Yeah.
Is there still migration to Vietnam? What's your daily what's your daily outgoing for both those countries, and how's that trending right now?
Sure. It's a great point, Matt. We're seeing a heavy shift to other countries. Footwear, obviously Vietnam is a major location, but across commodities, we're still seeing a major shift out of China. Like for example, we started moving our aircrafts. We run a lot of aircrafts out of China into North America, and we started shifting those to Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore. So we're seeing this shift to Southeast Asia in an intense way. India sub too. If you look at the high tech companies, they're going to India pretty heavy, and they're making big investments there. And I think there's, to your point about China, I think we're one of the largest forwarders in China, and we're seeing that shift. We're feeling that shift. We're hearing from our customers that it's definitely moving to Southeast Asia, India sub. So it's definitely an interesting dynamic, and I think people are a little spooked about the manufacturing there. But your point about the factories, I've heard the same thing. I mean, they're willing to do anything, but people want to diversify their supply chain. So even though they're dropping their prices, it's not stopping people from diversifying. So they still are moving out, kind of diversifying further. So yeah, I think it's something we have to pay attention to.
The India thing's interesting because we've noticed of late a couple things. One, there's investment going for footwear into India that we haven't seen in a long time. Like Pao Chen, one of the big athletic producers, Taiwanese publicly traded corporation, is investing close to $300 million in India for capacity building. Walmart's sourcing from there. I bought a pair of Nike 77 mid blazer high tops, kind of the classic shoe, made in India. So for the first time, I think we're moving from India looks great on paper, from a demographic perspective, a cost perspective, a shared kind of values with, democratic values kind of perspective, at least with the West, to that it never seemed to practically work well. And I think with these investments, it's a sign that the industry, at least in footwear, is going to make another kind of old college try to get it up and running and see if they can make India that one-stop shop that China seems to be shedding, at least as it relates to footwear production.
I'll tell you, logistically, it's always been a challenge, right? Because, but it's getting better. I will tell you that. So, I agree with all your comments. And from where I sit, it was always a major challenge. I couldn't get good information, couldn't get accurate sailing schedules, but now it's getting better. So, there's some movement there. And it really depends on who you have on the ground there. We have some great people on the ground there that have made my life easier. But in the past, I could never get good information. Vessels would miss the port, miss the sailing, miss the flight cancellation. Now it's a little bit more stable. So
that's interesting. But yeah, I think part of the challenge in the past, to Matt's point, was people were going to existing factories trying to make orders from people who have been doing this for years and had little interest in making adjustments or working with people in the way that people wanted to work with them. And now we see investment where new factories are being set up. And when you have new blood coming in, they're able to optimize a lot better and not have old ideas or old mindsets. In some ways, I look at Mexico in the same way. You've got a ton of traditional factories do leather who have no interest in doing more casual or more athletic where the current marketplace is. So it's hard to work with those folks. So you set up something, kind of newish, then you have an opportunity. But we see a lot of that on I think it's more the east coast of India. So near ports, near water, where some of that's happening, and we keep tracking that. Mike, as we kind of wrap up, and appreciate you coming on and sharing, honestly, and folks, just call Mike. I mean, if you want to talk about as somebody who can look at your strategy and look at what you're doing and what's coming, and he'll be at our logistics summit when we go out to Portland, or one of their team this September. So definitely look at FRA.org for that event. That's going to be very important to understanding cost issues, supply chain strategy issues. for holiday 2023 and then 2024 as well. But I always tell people, don't call when you got a problem. Call and build a relationship now. Ask questions. Squeeze Mike's brain really hard to get everything out you can. But I guess one of my final questions I have for you, Mike, and this goes back to what you were saying around like the cyclical nature of shippers. Have the ports and the truckers bringing product through the ports into warehouses, have we learned anything from the chaos that we just went through? Or is it just scale up, scale down? Are they actually like thinking about operations and investments that will make it easier as we move forward? Or are we just going to be reactionary again? What do you think on kind of that?
Right. So we talked about origin and kind of sourcing locations, right, at origin. But we've seen a lot of customers diversify on the port side too.
Mm-hmm.
Coming to the East Coast, right? New York outperformed California this year a couple months, and it's kind of shocking that New York would have more volume than California, right? Based on that situation. But I think you're seeing people, they want to diversify a lot. So you got some ports like that really took on a lot of volume, like Savannah, Charleston, and so forth. But they weren't really set up for that yet. They were kind of like, they said, oh, sure, we can handle it. But then could you really handle it, right? So they're still building out that infrastructure on the port side. I'm kind of curious what California is going to do, too, like LA, Long Beach, because they don't want to lose that volume to the East Coast or other port. Houston's become very popular as well. So I think the ports, that labor issue on the West Coast, I don't know where it stands today. I think we're closer on that side.
I heard yesterday, and again, we're taping this, but I heard the last week of June, July 4th week is the rumor that's circulating right now that they'll have an agreement.
They'll have some finalized, yeah. So they've gotten closer, but I think it's hurt them long term because there was so much uncertainty there for like 12 or 18 months. And I don't really know, what to say about that, but they've got to do something to kind of bring that volume back and give confidence to the shipper, like saying, okay. But then on the trucking side, Andy, that's a whole different thing. They keep trying to regulate these truckers further and further, especially on the West Coast, right? And it's become difficult to operate. It's hard to make money as a trucker. So that business is tough, but I think from a capacity standpoint, volumes are down, so it's more manageable now. But I'll add two comments to that. I think you're going to see a lot of consolidation on the trucking side, but I think you're also going to see a lot of consolidation on the freight forwarding side. There's certain freight forwarders that are heavily, focused on retail, fashion retail, and so forth. And if you're not diverse, you're going to see consolidation on my side of the business for sure. Okay. There's going to be some large acquisitions, small acquisitions. There's going to be a lot of acquisition activity during this, I would say, 12 to 24 month period. So you'll be on the lookout for that, making sure. You've seen a lot of layoffs on the freight forwarding side too, because people added all these people during COVID to handle the volume and stress and everything like that. So it's going to be very interesting to kind of watch what's going to happen here. And I think we're also seeing that work from home environment is kind of going away a little bit. So people don't want to go back to the office. So you got to deal with that factor as well. I've gotten, like I was telling you guys before, that I'm traveling now every week, Monday to Thursday, and I can't get myself back in the routine of doing that. I used to do it seamlessly before COVID. Now I'm like, I just want to kind of sit home. But you got to be out there in front of the customer, kind of doing the thing, providing solutions. But I think the truck and the port situation is going to hopefully even out this year. We'll see. We'll see.
All right. Here's to that. Folks, again, I'll remind you, go to ftra.org. You can see our events in Portland, Oregon in September. We've got a sustainability summit day 1, and day 2 is our logistics supply chain summit, where we talk about a lot of these different issues and help prepare people and build more agility and more strategy into that. But Mike, thanks for coming back on today and for sharing those insights. And as always, we appreciate the partnership and the support you give us so that we can continue to have conversations like this and run our events to educate and strengthen the industry.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So again, contact Mike, Apex. He knows what's happening. And again, we appreciate everybody for joining us today on the Shoe and Show. Shoeandshow.com is our website with the full catalogs. You can go back and take a listen to any supply chain, demand planning, anything like that might help you in your business. Again, we appreciate it. Tell a colleague, pass this around to friends so that other people can hear this conversation that we just had and hopefully help kind of strengthen your critical thought around the supply chain. Right now, it seems a little bit easier because of capacity, because of cost, but God knows what's going to happen next in this world. So prepare yourself now, folks. And again, as always, thanks for listening. And on behalf of Matt and myself, Shoe-In is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.